I'm outside of the southwestern US, but I've actually lived for many years down in Cortez, Colorado, prior to moving up here to Missoula, Montana. The Montana Climate Office is Montana's official climate data stewards, and our mission is to provide high quality, timely, relevant, and scientifically based climate information and services to all Montanans. We run a weather station network. That's what you see in the background of my picture here. But we also participate in the drought assessment process for Montana and for the northern Great Plains every single week and inform the US Drought Monitor, which will feature highly in my presentation. You can get to our information here. And then I'm here today representing a project that Katie and the Southwest Climate Hubs are actually a core part of, called the Native Resilience Project. This is a project that started a few years back to increase the impact of or enhance the impact of the climate hubs in Indian country across the US, but primarily in the Northern Plains and in the Southwest. We do so in three different ways. One, working directly with extension agents across the region to showcase food sovereignty, agroecosystem restoration, and other great work that's being done in Indian country. The second is by doing science communication and extension around climate data, building approaches that not only are enhancing the communication of the latest drought, climate, and weather information to producers and other interests across Native America, but also to focus on tribal data sovereignty and ways in which indigenous tribal ecological knowledge can be woven with Western data approaches to enhance resilience. And finally, there's a huge educational component where we're working in K through 12 schools to bring natural sciences into the schools and enhance that. You can get to this presentation later today and a lot of our resources at native-resilience.com. All right, here are the key takeaways for the Southwest for the rest of my presentation. I want to lead with these, then we'll go into it, and then I'll come back to these. But here's, I haven't had to give a really Debbie Downer drought presentation in a while, but unfortunately for the Southwest, things haven't gotten better this summer and are not looking good going into the fall. Severe and extreme drought conditions are persistent across the upper and lower Colorado River basins, especially west of the Divide, which is where it's really impacting the Four Corners states. We've seen, as you all know, an abnormally warm and dry summer in all but the plains, and it's kept soils dry across the region and led to drought disaster designations for most counties across the southwestern US. What we're forecasting going into our fall and winter is another dip into La Nina conditions. These are cold, equatorial Pacific sea surface conditions, but what it means is for the Southwest is persistent dry conditions as we move into fall and winter 2025-26. The NOAA Climate Prediction Center outlooks are echoing that. Their current predictions are for a pretty typical La Nina pattern, weak La Nina pattern of above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation going into the fall. And then because of that, drought conditions are expected to persist through winter 2025-26 across the region. So let's get into it, and maybe we can find some little glimmers of hope. This is the current US Drought Monitor assessment. This is from last week. The new one comes out tomorrow, so sorry you don't see one updated for this week. But this is telling you a lot of the story. Here are those extreme and, in fact, some areas of exceptional drought across the southern tier of the Four Corners states over into Southern California, and then covering much of the uplands going up into Wyoming. This is the upper Colorado River Basin and the lower Colorado River Basin that we're really worried about. you have all been used to seeing the U.S. Drought Monitor map that's produced out of the National Drought Mitigation Center on a weekly basis. What you probably haven't seen is just what this has looked like over the last 25 years. We're hitting a quarter century of U.S. Drought Monitor weekly reporting since January 4th, 2000. And why I'm showing you this minute and a half long animation of that full history is to illustrate the point that we've not been out of drought across the Western US and across the United States for a single week in the last 25 years. Somewhere has been experiencing drought conditions, and a lot of those drought conditions have really centered on the Western U.S., where we've been experiencing a mega drought that echoes past extremely dry periods from 1,000 years ago. So we're seeing one of the driest periods in the last 2,000 years continuing across the southwestern U.S. To today, and it happens to align with this with the history of the U.S. Drought Monitor. As we move forward into this decade, what we're going to see is really this amplification of drought that occurred during 2020, 2021 down in the Four Corners region. This area, this is why this drought webinar got started. But what we see is that over the last year, we've had an amplification of drought conditions, especially across the Rio Grande region, across the southern tier of New Mexico and Arizona. This summer, we have seen some relief in east of the divide, so in the Arkansas and Red River basins, but we haven't seen that improvement west of the divide. I want to break this down. I'm going to take that full 25-year history now and flatten it. And I'm going to flatten it for these regions of the U.S. These are hydrologic basins. This is how I like to think of splitting up the United States. And what you're going to see is actually these Western hydrologic basins right at the top. So I only really am going to have you focus in on the top bits of the graph where we're looking at the Pacific Northwest, Missouri, California Great Basin, Colorado, and Southern Plains. And that's what you're seeing here. This is just since January of 2020. What we see is that large drought event that really started in the Southern Plains, and then you can think of it as moving westward and northward over almost a 4-year period, where we started in the Southern Plains, had a big burst of exceptionally dry conditions across the Colorado River Basin. That drifted to the west over into California and the Great Basin, and then up into the Missouri River Basin in the Pacific Northwest over almost a 4-year period, bringing us through the pandemic, and then ending sort of right around the beginning of 2023. Unfortunately, some parts of the country have never gotten really out of having bits and pieces of that exceptional drought. And what we've seen during 2024, as we've moved through 2025, has been the reemergence of droughty conditions across these 4 basins. We see it here in the Colorado River Basin, starting towards the beginning of 2025, end of 2024, where we've had exceptional and extreme drought conditions again emerge, covering exceptional to severe drought conditions, covering most of the basin in the most recent drought monitor. If we look at that full 25-year history, we see that this pattern sort of echoes pretty routinely in terms of the progression of drought. And some of this has to do with our El Nino La Nina cycle. We'll see that in a bit. But what we often see is that droughty conditions will emerge in the Southern Plains, move into the Southwest and the California Great Basin region, and then drift northward into the Missouri and Pacific Northwest. I always look to the Southern Plains, the Colorado and California Great Basin as an early warning for what we're expecting in the northern part of the country where I live. But right now, we're still in that early phase of the emergence of really droughty conditions across the Colorado River Basin. And unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that that's not looking like it's going to improve. It has improved in some places, though, and this map is showing us the degree of improvement since the beginning of the calendar year. So this is since January 2025. For the last 9 months, how have we seen drought conditions progress across the United States? Well, what we've seen across the western U.S. is an improvement of conditions east of the Rocky Mountains. So in eastern New Mexico, where we started the year with really, really droughty conditions, we've seen actually the removal of droughty conditions across eastern New Mexico. However, across the upper Colorado River Basin, portions of the lower Colorado River, and the Great Basin, we've seen degradation of conditions, enhancement of drought conditions. Now, why have we seen that? Well, one of the reasons is that we've had less rain in this region over the last 90 days, over our summer, June through early September, through 2 days ago, than normal, and in some cases, well less, in the 10 to 30% range. These data come from one of the climate tools that I really like to go to when I'm looking for climate information. This is the GridMet gridded data product. And what it's showing is that we've seen much lower than normal precipitation across the Four Corners region, portions of California, up here in eastern Washington. It's been tremendously dry. But key is that this dryness is really centered on that Colorado River Basin. East of the Rockies, your Rocky Mountain front runs right along here. East of the Rockies, we're seeing wetter than normal conditions, which is good. That's what's been providing that relief. Unfortunately, we didn't see that during this summer. I was talking a little bit earlier to Katie, who said, you have had some precipitation events across the Southwest that have brought spotty, actually high amounts of precipitation, but unfortunately, that hasn't been a widespread scenario. At the same time, we've seen warmer than normal temperatures. What we've seen is that across that same last 90 days, so up to 2 days ago this summer, we've seen warmer than normal temperatures, especially in the uplands across much of the Southwest. So across the Mogollon Rim down here, the San Francisco Peaks, up into the San Juans and the Colorado Rocky Mountains, we've seen temperatures that trended 3, 4, 5 degrees warmer than normal across those months. That's led to increasing evaporative demand across this region. This is the Standardized Precipitation and Evapotranspiration Index. What that means is this is sort of the amount of water that's being sucked into the atmosphere from our plants through and from our soils through evaporation directly and transpiration as plants photosynthesize. And what we see when we've got warmer than normal conditions and drier than normal conditions is that we have higher than normal evapotranspiration. That's this dark red here. And what this is indicating is that this is some of the driest 90-day. So again, going back to early June, some of the driest conditions that we've seen in this region in terms of that evaporative demand throughout the summer. This is just drying out of those soils. So it's really these conditions that have led the U.S. Drought Monitor to continue to assess drought across the Southwest as being in that severe, extreme, and exceptional range. And you can really see how the pattern just kind of bounce back and forth between this map, this current Drought Monitor map, and the conditions, the evapotranspiration index. You can really see how the Drought Monitor map is echoing that evapotranspiration pretty strongly across this region. So the reason why we still have drought is that it's because it's still dry. You all are experiencing those warmer and drier than normal conditions. What does the future hold, though? Oh, wait. First, let me say that this has led to USDA secretarial drought designations, which is a fast track process to declare drought emergencies in counties that have experienced certain levels of drought, severe drought for more than 8 weeks, or any number of weeks in exceptional or extreme drought. And what we see is that most of the U.S. Southwest, especially the Four Corners region, and then down into Arizona, Southern California, New Mexico, and in Southern Nevada, are primary drought, have received primary disaster designations this year. This is one of the things that can trigger drought relief to communities, including programs like the Livestock Forage Disaster Program. So if your county is red or orange in this map, be looking for some of those programs, because there may be relief available to you. Notable is that the Navajo Nation, the Hopi Nation, and all of the Arizona tribes, and as well as the Ute Mountain Ute, Southern Ute, and other tribes, and the Pueblos across New Mexico, are all in these drought designations. The Navajo Nation also, I believe, declared their own tribal drought declaration this summer as well. So, what does the future hold? Well, the future currently is looking like a dip back into La Nina conditions for the winter of 2025 and 2026. What does La Nina mean for us in the Southwest? Well, typically, La Nina conditions lead to drier and slightly warmer than normal conditions across the US Southwest. This is a history of El Nino and La Nina since 2000. What we see is El Nino events appear in red, La Nina events in blue. Just this wiggly line. It's a cycle that happens due to warming and cooling of waters in the equatorial Pacific. This is where we're at right now. We did experience a very weak La Nina event over this last winter. We've moved back into what's called INSO neutral, neither El Nino or La Nina during the spring and summer of 2025. However, a series of models, each of these is a different model for the way in which climatologists expect the equatorial Pacific to warm or cool. And what we see is that the average of those models, that's the dashed line down here, have us moving back into La Nina conditions, potentially even stronger La Nina conditions than this previous winter, during the winter of 2026. We can look at that in probabilistic terms. This graph is from the Climate Prediction Office. These are their official probabilistic El Nino forecasts from just last month. And what we're seeing is currently we're looking at conditions where we are in neutral INSO conditions. But as we move into the fall, August, September, October, November, and so on, what we see is that we have increasing likelihood of dipping down into La Nina conditions, breaking 50%. So just around a flip of a coin, but still breaking 50% as we move into October, November, December, January. And then likely coming back out. And that's what we saw on this graph as we emerge out of those conditions going into the spring and summer months. So again, typical La Nina conditions for the southwestern US would be a drier than normal winter. It's certainly something that we've seen many times in the past. And I'm about to show you that we expect to see it into the future. The other thing that I wanted to do, though, is just line up This graph, which is those El Nino and La Nina conditions across that same depiction of drought across the United States that we saw earlier. And just to note that there is a relationship between La Nina conditions and especially the emergence out of La Nina conditions. So you can think of that as warming of the equatorial Pacific Ocean and these cycles of drought that we see move from the southern plains through the Colorado, California Great Basin, Missouri River, and Pacific Northwest. It's something I'll really be looking at as we emerge out of this latest La Nina cycle. Is that a consistent trend? Are we seeing warming of the equatorial Pacific? And what does that mean for the propagation of drought conditions, of dry conditions, as we move into our next El Nino cycle? So what's the outlook? We only have a couple minutes left. What's our outlook? Here's our 6 to 10 day temperature outlook from just yesterday. Warmer than normal conditions across much of the US, but near normal across the Southwest, and wetter than normal. This could give us a brief respite to our current dry, hot conditions across the southwestern US. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it's going to last. Going out 2 weeks, we see a warming trend coming into the Southwest, where it's likely going to be near normal or above normal temperatures. Hopefully, this precipitation comes in strong over the next 2 weeks. But then we start seeing this La Nina pattern emerging in the Climate Prediction Center's monthly outlooks. This is weeks 3 to 4 through the end of September, where we're expecting warmer than normal conditions across the southern tier of the U.S. Maybe a bit above normal precipitation. And then our seasonal outlooks really are the things that make it so that we're not expecting much relief in terms of our drought conditions. The Climate Prediction Center for fall of 2025 is expecting much above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation across the Four Corner states, across the Southwest, and in fact over into the Southern Plains as well. And then they expect that this is really based on that La Nina, that expectation or forecast of a La Nina emerging, but really expect that to continue through winter, December, January, February, through this winter of above normal conditions across the southern Southwest and above normal temperatures, and below normal precipitation. That leads to this, which is a product that combines the U.S. Drought Monitor, the current assessment of the U.S. Drought Monitor, with those CPC Climate Prediction Center outlooks to create a drought outlook for the United States. They do this at 2 time scales. One is a monthly outlook. This one extends through September 2025, so through the end of the month. The expectation is that we'll persist in drought conditions across much of the West. We may see some further improvement in drought conditions across the extreme southern corners of Arizona and New Mexico, and maybe even removal of drought conditions continuing to creep a little bit to the west in southeastern New Mexico, but not a lot of relief looking likely here. And then this is through November. This is your 3-month outlook through the end of November, where we see very little change in the southwestern portion of the U.S. And we see, in fact, an enhancement of drought here in the Central Plains, and then up into the eastern flanks of the northern Rockies. So we're seeing dry conditions likely persisting across much of the West. One last thing. wildfire is currently central on our mind. We're having a little bit of relief up here from smoke in the Missoula Valley currently. Just wanted to share with you the burning index, although I didn't update this graph, so that is not what we want to be looking at. But I do want to share with you the current fire potential outlook going out the next few months. This is from the National Interagency Fire Center down in Boise. What we're seeing is that we've got near normal conditions for wildland fire potential across much of the Southwest. Our problem areas are actually in northern Nevada, the Sierra Nevadas, and Northern California, and then out on the Olympic Peninsula and generally west of the Cascades are seeing above normal fire potential here in September 2020, in September of this month. This is expected to improve and move towards near normal conditions, with the exception of the LA and San Francisco areas into October. Some emergence in the Southern Plains in November, and then the only hot spot that is expected looking 4 months out in terms of above normal fire potential is in December. I've got some other information here just about our current fill levels. It's something that we're going to be really looking at. If we don't have a good snowpack in the upper Colorado River this winter, we're starting from a huge deficit in Lake Powell and Lake Mead, and so water quantity is going to be one of the primary things that we're going to look at, and that impact on our hydrologic system in general as we move through the winter. So again, your key takeaway here is that it's been bad, you know that, but unfortunately, the current forecast is for a weak La Nina going into this winter, and that tends to mean above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation, a persistence of drought conditions across the Southwest. I can take questions in the last minute or so that we have. Thanks.